Hey everyone, Prashan here from Audio Technology. Thanks for tuning in to another video. Today I have with me the Universal Audio Vault 276. It's a USB 2.0 audio interface. It has two inputs on the front here. You can see on the combo connectors you can plug in an XLR mic input or line and instrument level signals. It's a two output interface, so you have a headphone output over here and a pair of TRS monitor outputs on the back. There's a couple of MIDI connections for MIDI I/O. It is a bus powered interface, but you can also plug in regular power. There's a power switch, which is a nice feature on a bus powered interface. And of course, a big volume knob on the top. So what makes the UAD Vault 276 different to the many other interfaces exactly like it on the market? Well, the clue is on the top panel here. There's these two buttons. One is a 76 compressor. The other one is a button called Vintage. Now, the 76 compressor is actually an analog circuit that Universal Audio has built into the preamp stages of both inputs, and it's based off the design of the 1176 limiting amplifier. Now, I'll say that again, that was an analog circuit, right? This isn't a DSP chip that's living in the interface emulating the sound. It's literally built in with electronics, and so when you click that compressor button on, it's activating an extra part of the circuit that's creating this famous 1176 sound. If any company is qualified to include an 1176 style compressor into an audio interface, it's Universal Audio, because they literally designed the hardware unit. But it would be wrong to expect it to sound exactly the same, because if you went to a shop right now to buy an 1176 hardware unit, you'll literally pay 10 times as much as this interface costs. But the idea is, this button will hopefully get you in the ballpark of recreating that famous, classic, punchy, aggressive, FET-style compression that we all know and love. Now, the other button is this Vintage button over here. And what that is, it's an emulation of the LA-610 tube preamp. I've used the Universal Audio LA-610 a number of times in studios, and it has a really distinctive, warm, and slightly overdriven sound. It's not a clean, transparent, neutral sounding preamp. And so I love that that's an option here, because you can record clean, like I'm coming through right now, just through the built-in preamps. But then as soon as I engage that Vintage button, you might be able to hear the difference in the tone. It's adding a little more high end. There's a slight crunchiness in the highs that's very typical of tube distortion when you're driving the input stage. It is a slightly firmer, more aggressive sound that I think does a really good job faithfully reproducing exactly what an LA-610 does to an input signal. And if I switch that off again, just see if you can hear the difference in sound as I turn the Vintage button off. I think the sound gets slightly woollier. The sibilance is a little less piercing, so it's an indicator that there is a difference in the high end. If I switch it back on, there is that bump in high end that seems pretty clear to me. The high mids seem to be a little more present, a little more edgy and forward sounding. And it adds a very subtle yet pleasing harmonic distortion. You might be able to hear the distortion a little bit more if I wind up the input gain. As I wind it up, you're probably hearing that distortion kick in a little more. It's not like a really ugly distortion, but you can hear there's a little bit of fraying at the edges as that tube saturation kicks in. And of course, as I dial back the gain, you'll hear it clean up. So that Vintage button that's emulating the LA-610 is a fantastic addition to the Vault 276. Definitely makes it a little more versatile, because you literally get two different sounds with one button. Now you can see with the 76 compressor button, there are three different options. There's vocal, guitar, and fast. Universal Audio doesn't actually tell us what settings are changing between these three options, and it can be a little bit tricky to hear, but I want to just cycle through these and see if you can hear any difference. So right now my mic is connected to the interface and I'm running through the vocal compression. If I click it over to guitar, again, it is a very subtle difference, but to my ears, it sounds like the attack time has opened up a little bit, because it is letting some of those transients through. And that makes sense, because if you're recording an acoustic guitar or stringed instruments, you might want to have that attack time opened up a bit to allow those transients to pass through and not completely choke the life out of, the pick hitting the strings and things like that. Now, if I switch over to fast, we'll see how the compression sound changes again. And to my ears, it seems like this is definitely compressing a bit harder, because my voice feels slightly louder, and I think the attack time has wound up a lot more, the release time as well. The way I can tell is because hearing back through my headphones right now, I'm in an untreated room. There's not much acoustic treatment in here. And on the fast setting, I can hear the sound of the room a little bit more. At the end of a word or a sentence, you can hear the acoustic reflections just bloom a little bit more. And that's typical of heavy compression. So I think the ratio would go up, the threshold would go down, and the attack and release times would get shorter on the fast setting. So I'll just cycle through. So this is with no compression at all. I've just turned the 76 compressor off. Beside the drop in level, there's clearly a drop in noise as well. As you'd expect, when the compressor is engaged, the noise floor will be lifted up because there's an automatic makeup gain that will be applied when the compressor is switched on. So I'm switching back onto the vocal compression setting now. Again, instant difference in level, but there's really clearly more presence. I really like what this compressor and the LA-610 emulation is doing on my voice through this dynamic mic right now. Dynamic mics typically don't have loads of high end, so I think the LA-610 emulation is bringing the best out of the mic. You might want to be careful if you're running a bright condenser through this LA-610 emulation. Things could get a little gnarly in the highs. But the 76 compressor is definitely adding this punch and grit to the sound, but without extra artifacts, which is really nice. Because you don't want to hear pumping and breathing, and you don't want to hear the compressor just squishing the audio. But it is doing that classic 1176 thing of just making the source sound more together, more firm, more in your face. I'll click over now to the guitar setting. Again, a very subtle difference, but I do think what's happening there is the attack time is opening up. I can't really tell if it's compressing harder or softer. I'll click over to the fast setting, and it does seem to me that the attack time decreases because it is now catching every single transient. And we click it back to off. You can hear straight away, this is how it sounds with no compression at all. I'll have a go recording a couple of other sources through the Vault 276 compression to see if that might highlight some of the other aspects of the compression that we can't really hear just with spoken word. So I pulled out the trusty acoustic guitar. Here's how it sounds with no compression and the vintage button turned off. Now with the vintage button turned on, now we'll switch over to the vocal compression setting. It's crazy how much the level jumps up. I might dial back the gain just a tiny bit, and we'll switch over to the guitar compression setting. I'm just going to switch back to the vocal and then switch to the guitar so we can compare that again. This is vocal. And guitar. I think the difference in attack time is really showing up there. Now switching over to the fast compression setting. And off. And just for one more comparison, I pulled out the electric guitar. This is DI'd straight into the interface, no amp simulation or anything like that. What you're hearing now is the compression turned off and the vintage button turned off. Now I'll switch the vintage button on and see how that changes the sound. And now I'll engage the compression first up on the vocal setting. Switching over to the guitar setting now. And over to the fast setting. And finally, I'll just switch it back to off to compare. There's no doubt that the built-in analog compression circuit and that vintage button gives you a fair bit of sonic flexibility. And there's something to be said for just the quality of the preamps by themselves. Like just going in DI'd with an electric guitar actually sounds pretty good without even anything else added to it. And that's a testament to the fact that this is quality gear even without the effects added on top. But when you add those effects on top, the ability to chuck on some compression, the ability to change the character of the preamp, you do have a fairly versatile recording interface. So let's say you're in the market for a little audio interface like this one. 2 inputs, 2 outputs. You want it to be easy to use, easy to set up, bus powered, portable. The UAD Vault 276 ticks a lot of the boxes. Now, there was a time before we did absolutely everything in the box where it was really fashionable to record your tracks through a channel strip. And the idea was you'd run it through a nice preamp, a nice EQ, a nice compressor, all hardware based, and it would already sound pretty amazing before it actually reaches your DAW. Nowadays, we tend to do everything in the box, whether that's like running it through pre's or compression or just a bit of tube distortion, whatever that might be, because there's a plugin for everything. But what it seems to me UAD is trying to do by adding these options into an interface is to in some way recreate that channel strip thing. Because let's say you flick this vintage mode off and you're going to record most of your tracks through just the clean preamp. And that's fine. It actually sounds really good by itself. But let's say you're tracking a song and you decide there's one particular vocal that you think would work really well with a little extra grit, a little extra distortion, a bit more cut through because you want it to poke out of the mix a bit more. It's so nice just to have that option there to click on the vintage mode, and it is adding this extra dimension of harmonic distortion to your sound. And you know, it's just going to sit there printed in the track in your DAW. It's not something you've got to add later with the tape plugin or whatever. Same with the compression. Say for the most part, you're going to leave the compressor off, record your tracks nice and dry so you have full flexibility in your DAW. But maybe you're recording a really dynamic saxophone player and he's going loud, he's going soft. It's so nice just to have the option to just click on the compressor. This is literally just one button. You flick it over to a setting that you know is going to sound good, and you have some good level management, a bit of clip insurance on the way in as you're printing to a DAW. That's where I see the value in the Vault 276. You get a little extra sonic crafting potential on the way into your DAW, and that can be invaluable in just giving your tracks a bit more flavor. The 76 compressor and the LA-610 emulation do sound to me to be very faithful recreations of what the original hardware units sound like. Obviously, you're not going to have nearly as much control as if you own the actual hardware, but it is producing a very similar sonic signature, which is just placing over your tracks for very minimal effort. It's not like you've got to patch in hardware or anything like that. It's just a button and it's adding a bit of X factor to your sounds. So thanks for watching this video. If you own a Vault 276, post your impressions in the comments below. I'd love to hear how it's working for you and how you're making the most of its features. Head over to audiotechnology.com to stay up to date with industry news, more product reviews, feature articles, interviews with artists and more. And we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.